Imagine being so itchy that you'd consider cutting off your skin just for relief. Picture yourself only feeling comfortable when covered in ice packs. Think about forgetting simple tasks like how to make coffee because your mind is so consumed with not scratching. This was Heather's reality when she was first diagnosed with chronic spontaneous urticaria. Join us for an eye-opening interview as Heather shares her journey from the intense pain to finally finding relief. And no, she didn't have to cut off her skin. This episode is produced in partnership with the Allergy and Asthma Network. We want to thank Novartis for sponsoring this episode. You're listening to The Itch, a podcast exploring all things allergy, asthma, and immunology. Today, we are talking about quality of life with chronic spontaneous urticaria. And just a reminder, we'll probably be using the abbreviation CSU a lot in this episode. So when you hear CSU, that's chronic spontaneous urticaria. Today, Heather is joining us, and Heather is a patient who lives with CSU. We're really excited to have you on, Heather, to talk to us about quality of life. So I think we should just jump in. Heather, tell us a little bit about you and your journey with CSU.
Well, I'm glad to be here with you guys to describe my experience with CSU. I had never even heard of it, of course, until this started. It was August of 2021 for me, and I was happily standing in line at a Starbucks getting a coffee. I hadn't done that in a long time because of the pandemic. And as I was standing in line, I noticed that my feet started to itch and my palms started to itch. And they also started to get hot, and they started to feel like they were swelling, although I couldn't visibly see it. That progressed. The itch got worse and more intense, and just within a matter of 10 or 15 minutes. And then my throat started to feel scratchy, and the family that I was with was concerned I was having a more serious reaction to something. And so I went to an urgent care. They sent me to the ER, saw a doctor in the ER, and was treated for anaphylaxis, and referred to my GP, referred to an allergist who was fantastic, is fantastic. I started working with him right away, and I had a great experience. It felt like a partnership from the beginning. He did a lot of patient explaining to me what was going on. I was trying to figure out, of course, what I had reacted to, and he explained that sometimes you never can figure out what is happening or what's caused the hives. The few days before I saw him, I took lots of pictures of the hives, so that really helped. So we started a partnership in the treatment. To back up a little bit, the daily experiencing having the hives was one of the most difficult things about this, is explaining to people that you have such an intense itch that it is so distracting from just even being able to think straight. I had itch all over my body. It was trunk, it was limbs, it was feet, it was hands. I tried a lot of over-the-counter medications, whether it was topicals. I was on a lot of allergy medication. The one thing that I found that really helped were ice packs. I spent hundreds of dollars on ice packs, and I made fun of it. I called it my ice pack superhero costume because I had an ice pack for pretty much every part of my body that I could cover. And then my life became rotating ice packs and trying to do things in between. Just talking about this, my hands are itching. So I've got my hands resting on a couple of ice packs here, cloth-covered ice packs. Just even talking about it, the sensations come back.
I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that tickling of the throat and possible anaphylaxis is not a part of a diagnosis with chronic spontaneous urticaria. So I'm imagining that the tickling in the throat, you didn't experience that again, or that's not a common symptom that you have, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify and make sure that everyone knows that's listening that we don't normally expect any kind of throat closing or voice changes or any other symptoms that reflect more of a systemic reaction that would make us think of anaphylaxis to be a part of this diagnosis. So it sounds like everything was probably limited to your skin moving forward. Is that correct, for them to make a clear diagnosis of CSU?
Very much so.
Okay. And then it sounds like maybe your CSU is associated with angioedema, which is swelling. Is that what you were having too?
Yes, that didn't remain for me, but was part of what I initially noticed.
And then moving forward, it was just mostly classic hives with the itching and the welts.
Yeah, that's what it was.
So you had the first hive experience at the coffee shop, and then after you saw or you went to urgent care, how long was it between seeing urgent care and then getting to the allergist? And did your hives just never go away? Or how did that experience pan out?
I did feel like I got some relief from the ER. I think it was just a week or two. It was really pretty quick, pretty good self advocate. And like I said, the allergist was just a couple doors down from my GP. So I walked in and said, "Hey, I want to see you." So probably a couple of weeks. And I had hives for several months before we really started to see some significant relief.
I was lucky. I was working from home at the time. So I was able to use all of these different ice packs and sort of come and go to work. I was very fortunate as far as that went. But I also felt pretty crazy while this was going on. The itch is so intense, and scratching, although it seems to relieve it temporarily, never helps things. So I mentioned I used ice packs. I used a lot of the over-the-counter topicals with lidocaine in them and those kinds of things to try to get some relief. And maybe I got a little bit from them. I remember talking to somebody when I was in the throes of this before I found any significant relief. And I said, it's like your skin is screaming at you and you're trying to do things like make coffee or do some work or just regular life while your skin is screaming at you. It was really a crazy sensation. The other way I could describe it too was I sort of had these fantasies of the itch was so bad that pain would be a relief from the itch. And so I had these images of just sort of cutting your skin and how relieving that sensation would be. I never did that, but it was something I thought about a lot. While I was in the throes of it, really the only thing that gave me serious relief was ice and sleep. And sleep was really hard. I took a lot of sleeping pills and I had some, I know it's not recommended, but I had some leftover pain medications from past surgeries, and that helped me sleep and maybe dulled the itch sensation a little bit. It was like your life kind of just exploded. And all of a sudden, you were no longer in control.
I also just wanted to quickly mention that the use of ice and staying cool is something that we do recommend for patients with CSU because, as you mentioned, Heather, your body feels like it's heating up, and being hot can oftentimes be an aggravating factor for people with CSU. So it makes sense that ice would help your symptoms and that provided some relief to you.
Yes.
I'm just curious about your journey because you go to your allergist and you get the diagnosis, and then you're also finding all of these ways to manage the symptoms that are going on. How did your allergist help you figure out what you need to do to feel like you can just live your everyday life without going crazy?
I think the best thing that he offered was ongoing sort of side by side support. I could get in to see him whenever I needed to. He was very patient and discussed all the possible treatments on a treatment spectrum and, conservative to more aggressive approaches, and said, we'll decide together what we want to do. So he said, if you feel bad enough and you want to just go straight to the top of the most serious treatment, I'll work with you on that. If you want to start somewhere in the middle or at the beginning, the least aggressive or most conservative way, we'll do that. He supported the ice packs. I don't know that I mentioned the pain medication, honestly, to him, but we definitely talked about over-the-counter products, and he kind of just supported whatever worked. He did not have a lot of support to offer in managing the itch other than we can get this under control. We'll do everything we can. So he offered hope.
When the allergist explained to you that allergy testing was not needed, that this is most likely related to just something that's happening to you inside your body, as opposed to something external that's causing it to happen. How did you come to terms with that? And what did you hear that helped you understand that message?
Well, I have to say, in all honesty, I didn't believe him. I think I insisted on allergy testing because I just needed, I guess, to do something that I felt would help me. And that's what I could envision. And I'm one of those people, I don't know a term for it, but where I basically reacted to whatever I was skin tested for. And I remember him calling in his staff and saying, okay, I want you to see, this is kind of rare. This is one of those people who react to everything. So you have to look for more subtle indicators. And just his affect and our relationship gave me a lot of comfort.
That's what happens a lot of times. People come in to see me and they have this condition, and I know that they have this condition, and I don't want to test them necessarily. I do end up testing them when they feel very, very strongly about being tested, as long as I've given them the information that I need to give them so that they know that they don't necessarily need the testing, and that I've articulated that if they really, really insist on it, I will do it, because for some people, it gives them the peace of mind to know that we've checked off all of those boxes and that we have looked at that piece just to make sure that nothing's going on in that area. Just knowing that you're not allergic on the testing can help people just mentally and psychologically.
Yeah. And then I think you have to keep in mind, I at the time didn't have an education about CSU, so I couldn't imagine anything outside of my typical allergist framework. So, and I hear you echoing that as a doctor. It's also hard when your brain capacity is devoted to something else or your skin is screaming at you to do good research too. Another thing I mentioned, because it was just a sort of a strange thing when you're laying there feeling so desperate. I remember being in my 20s and hearing a story about a gentleman who had chronic hiccups. And he'd had hiccups for like 5 or 7 years for some extended amount of time. And he ended up committing suicide. And the indications were he committed suicide because he couldn't stand the hiccups anymore. And I just remember at the time thinking, what? That doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why anybody would do such a drastic thing over something that seemed kind of not so harmful, kind of cute, kind of funny. I've always thought hiccups were kind of funny when people have them. It was in the moments of just sort of the first week or so of dealing with the hives that I was like, oh, I get it. I get it. If his hiccups were so severe that he couldn't even think straight, I get it, because this is not living. This is no life to live. I never felt desperate. I never felt suicidal. I had, like I said, this doctor who was saying, we'll figure this out together. I think of this guy often and never knew him or anything, but think of him often. We gradually progressed, I would say, between August to basically October. We decided I would start taking Xolair injections. And by November, I was being educated by them in the office and doing Xolair injections. And those provided me almost immediate relief, immediate substantial relief. And it only got better and better and better with each injection. I did the first few injections in the office as required. They showed me how to do the injections. Then you sit in the office for a couple hours and they want to make sure you don't have any reactions. Then I started doing them at home. I would say I'm 98, 99% improved.
So it sounds like you started with oral medications, with the oral antihistamines.
I was actually on several and still am. I haven't backed off on that yet. Give myself these injections every 28 days. And I would say about the 25th or 26th day, I can start to feel tingles, like it's time to do those injections. So we haven't backed off on anything that we're doing yet.
I just wanted to clarify that the medication that Heather's talking about, Xolair, which is also omalizumab, which is the generic name for it, is a biologic medication that we have discussed in our last episode. That is a treatment that we reserve for people that do not respond to oral medications for their CSU or chronic spontaneous urticaria. It is an injectable medication and it can be taken at home after you've been observed in the office for a certain period of time. So it sounds like once you started the omalizumab, you were one of those patients that responded really well and you felt much better. So how did it feel going from this moment of despair to feeling better?
Yeah, it's interesting when you go through something like that. I don't know if trauma is the right word, but it definitely felt like my life flipped upside down. It felt for quite a while like everything was fragile, including me. I think emotionally, I just was afraid that somehow I would do some unknown thing that would create that situation again. So I think it was just a matter of time of living with this successful treatment that I started to gain confidence that this was working for me and I wouldn't have to live with that terrible itching.
So you talked about itch. I don't have urticaria, but I have eczema. When I have flares, I feel like 70% of my brain capacity is used to not scratch. So that's my experience with itch, but I would love to know a little bit more about just what it feels like to live with this itch, the fear of the itch, and like we mentioned, ice, but I know that you have a few other strategies on how to cope with that.
Well, I still am pretty heat sensitive, and it's interesting in this process. I feel like this was like, for me personally, and I don't know that this is true, but it feels like it was the beginning of a cascade of various problems for me over the last several years. The CSU is managed, and it's managed well. The only time I experience hive-like itch now is each month when I do the injections. I get little hives at the injection site, which from what I understand is pretty common. And for me, a very, very good trade-off from the overall full body hives. I think the other thing is I have probably every personal sized fan known to man. I also deal with a skin condition that causes flare up on my face, get bright red, bright red. It gets painful sometimes and swells up. I'm still trying to figure out what that is, depending on who you talk to. I've heard everything from rosacea to lupus to all kinds of things. So I'm in the process of trying to figure that out. And I saw that there are these great little personal fans that you can wear around your neck, sort of adjust them right up towards your face, 2 little fans wrapped around your neck that blow on your face constantly. And that's been a great help for me. It was handy during COVID because I could tell people I used them to keep the steam off my glasses from wearing the face mask. But I really like those now. And I usually have a fan going just to keep the heat at bay. And I live in a pretty cool area. I mean, I'm just a couple blocks away from the ocean.
Going back to the psychological impact, you'd mentioned that really sad story about the gentleman that committed suicide over his hiccups. Did you seek out any help during that time emotionally to support you? Do you feel comfortable sharing? Do you have a therapist that you see regularly? Or did you initiate seeing a therapist during that time at all?
I did not. I have seen a therapist over the years for other issues, and I think it's just a great experience for any human to have, regardless of the issue. I think you can learn from therapists even if you don't think you have any issues. So I didn't think of that. I did do a lot of course, reading and research. That sort of is my comfort zone. And I could see information that supported what my doctor was telling me. I could see information that explained the experience of other people that often sounded similar. Over the last couple of years, I've talked with several different groups and individuals who have CSU as well and have had dramatically different experiences. Different things induce the hives for them. They've responded differently to different treatments. So I guess just talking to other people makes you feel a little more sane. But I don't think I had the focus. And I like what Courtney said about 70% of her brain is devoted to itch. It is just an overwhelming thing. So I don't think I even thought to seek out emotional support. I was so overwhelmed by the physical. But it sounds like a great idea. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, I often recommend it for any patient that's going through a chronic condition that doesn't feel manageable and it feels overwhelming. I think being able to speak to someone is very helpful, especially a therapist. But it also sounds like you found some groups that were really helpful online. Did you also use social media as an avenue to find information, or were you using mostly blogs and websites?
Mostly blogs and websites. My allergist hooked me up with the Allergy and Asthma Network, which has been a great resource, has expanded my world and my understanding of CSU and connected me with various groups. So I recommend them to anyone who has any allergy, asthma issues. And I guess I don't feel the need for support now because I feel like it's under control. I think if I started to lose that control again, that's something I would definitely seek out. I would need it because I'd be really concerned I'd be back to where I started. But so far, it's been a number of years and I've been quite lucky. And I have to say, I feel like I had everything going for me in this situation. I had time off if I needed it. I was working from home, which was quite fortunate. I had insurance that allowed me to see whatever doctors I wanted to see. Didn't have to wait for referrals or anything, and found the right doctor. I've heard horror stories of people going to different dermatologists and not actually getting a diagnosis for a number of years, which just sounds devastating to me. Everything went right for me, and I'm so grateful for that. And in spite of that, it was still pretty devastating while it was happening. And so sudden and so unexplainable. That's part of the lack of control, I guess. You don't know what caused this. And I stay active, and I still read a lot and read about research and all the different treatments that are coming for CSU.
Can you tell us how you explain your condition to your friends, family, and colleagues who aren't familiar with chronic spontaneous urticaria?
Yeah, with friends and family, I took an idea that I heard from your podcast, which was to name the CSU or whatever issue that you're dealing with. I don't remember the lady's name, but she named, I think it was her mast cell disease, Linda. And I copied that right away. I thought that was a great idea. So I have shorthand with friends and family, like I can't make it. Linda's acting up today, and they all know what that means. In the workplace, because this happened while so many of us were working from home, I really didn't have the need to share it with people. And we had pretty flexible schedules, again, because we were working remotely. I think the way Courtney put it, where she talks about a large percentage of her brain capacity being devoted to the sensation, is a great way to put it. I say your skin is screaming at you, so it's hard to focus on anything. I remember just even having to stop and really deliberately think about, okay, this is how I make coffee when I was in the throes of it, or whatever I was doing, or cooking a dish. I think that's the best way that I have found to describe it to people, just so they understand the severity.
I know that personally when I have like really bad eczema flares, and I equate it to mosquito bites, because I know a lot of people know what it feels like to have mosquito bites and they want to scratch them. So I'd always try to find a way to communicate the sensation that maybe someone experiences. And like, just imagine mosquito bites all over your body and they just don't
Yeah.
stop. Like, they're just itchy all the time. That's the experience of the itch. We always like to ask what you would tell someone who's going through this. So if someone's experiencing hives and they have no idea why they are or what's happening to them, what would you tell them? And I know that you said this with your doctor, is that he gave you hope. And I feel like that's a really beautiful thing to hear. Just what would you tell someone if they have hives and they feel completely lost? They don't feel like they're being heard.
Yeah, if I felt like the person maybe didn't know how to advocate well for themselves with their doctor, we might discuss that. I'm a big believer in preparing for a doctor visit of any kind with a list of questions. Otherwise, I invariably forget something, a list of new symptoms, if that's what it is, and letting the doctor's office know that you're coming with a list. I think after the first couple of times you do that, they kind of expect it from you, so they're ready to address it. Finding the right doctor, finding someone that you're comfortable with, or working with multiple doctors simultaneously if you have that ability or you can afford it, or if the doctors are available in your area. Sometimes that can be quite a challenge. And then connecting with various networks, whether it's social media, blogs, websites, researching it yourself. The Allergy and Asthma Network, I can't thank them enough and recommend them enough for connecting me with so many people and giving me my first CSU online quiz that I took. That's something I learned the other day, is that often you can reach out to the different pharmaceutical companies. Depending on the medication that you're taking, they may have some sort of support network for you there, or some creative ideas. So that was something that I just learned about and will add to my list of tools. I think it's also important to take somebody with you to the doctor. I know most doctors aren't comfortable being recorded, but sometimes I'll say, can I record this conversation just so I can revisit it later, because I don't catch everything the first time around. It's important to advocate for yourself, knowing that you're at sort of a decreased mental ability while your body's dealing with this.
Great. Well, are there any other parting messages for somebody dealing with CSU that you would want to share?
Hang on, there's hope. And from my standpoint, it looks like there's lots of great treatments. If one hasn't worked for you yet, there's lots of great treatments coming to market soon. And I hope you find one that gives you the relief that I found.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Remember that all information you hear today is for informational purposes only and are not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, and/or medical treatment of a qualified physician or healthcare provider. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. And if you have a second, help spread the word by rating our podcast and sharing with your friends and family who might also be interested in learning more about allergies, asthma, and immunology. You can always stay up to date by checking out our Instagram, The Itch Podcast, where you can leave questions you are itching to know, or check out our website, which is www.itchpodcast.com, which contains more information about the subjects we covered in today's episode and every episode. Until next time, have a fabulous week.